Okay. Is to first introduce from three works. The first one will be the Communist Manifesto of Marx and Engels. The second one will be Du Bois, and the third one will be our own constitution. And Karl Marx and Engels in the, and you will see how this connects in terms of what I want to say at the end of the discussion. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels says the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. Marx says oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. A fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstruction of society or in the common ruin of contending classes. Marx writes this in the 19th century, and Du Bois, writing in the 20th century, declared that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, the relations of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa, in America and the islands of the sea. This he writes in his book, The Soul of Black Folks. The third is the preamble of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which states partly the following: that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. And it continues to say, we adopt this constitution as to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, improve the quality of life of all citizens, and free the potential of each person, and build a united democratic South Africa, able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. And Marx and Engels, writing in the 19th century when the industrialized countries were on the voyage of colonization, understood that the haves fight to maintain their privilege against the haves not. Hence, as long as that conflict is not overcome, there would always be confrontation. Those with power will use their power to maintain their status. Whereas Du Bois experienced these power relations in the 20th century, and shortly after the abolition of slavery in the United States of America, sees this conflict or contestation in terms of race. The whites of the United States of America, for historical reasons that had to do with slavery, were privileged, had land and resources on their side, whereas blacks who were slaves had no land and no resources. The Native Americans were in a long time ago marginalized and pushed to the reserves. Henceforth, the events that are taking place in the United States of America today need to be understood both in class and racial terms, because the majority of the poor continue to be those that were enslaved. In other words, the results of class antagonism in the United States of America manifests itself in racial terms because of this racial history. In our own country, in South Africa, the former colonizers had all the power and privilege on their side. To maintain their class privilege, they resorted to the use of racial discrimination and racial solidarity through enacting a string of laws, among the working class too, and got used to privilege afforded to it because of the complexion of their skin, thus equating skin color with ability, skill, and knowledge. These laws ensured that, one, blacks were relocated to ghettos through the Group Areas Act. The Labor Preferential Act ensured that blacks will not be employed in certain jobs. The Jobs Reservation Act ensured that only certain jobs and positions could be held by whites. And there are many such related laws that we can go to that led to this. That is why Verwoerd could boldly and confidently state that what is the use of teaching a black child mathematics when they could not put it in practice, which was true because with mathematics, you could not do certain engineering because even if you studied them, you would not be employed as an engineer. These kinds of laws were products of white supremacy and practice over a long period of time became ingrained in the minds of many of those privileged by them. Of course, we need to state this. There were also many white compatriots who were disgusted by these laws and threw their weight with the oppressed in fight against segregation and apartheid. The intervention of the new constitution, in my view, was revolutionary, both in content and nature, and no doubt radically changed the South African legal system. This is despite the legacy of segregation and apartheid that continue to bedevil our society at large. However, it will seem to me the bourgeoisie, at least, even if in polite tones, have found some common ground, whereas the working class continue to feel the legacy of segregation and apartheid. What has happened since the adoption of the new constitution is the emergence of the black bourgeoisie, which develop similar interest with their white counterparts. This common interest is clearly identifiable when there is conflict among the working class and unemployed in contest over resources. In communities where predominantly the working class resides, which in South Africa is mainly the townships, the face of that poor working class is black. It is in constant competition over scarce resources. This constant competition at times reveals itself as what we have come to refer to as xenophobia broadly. Historically, though, this competition and contestation over resources is not new. When South Africa was a closed society, this power was contested based on so-called tribal or clan lines. Henceforth, Pixlika Isake Seme found it necessary to write, and I'm quoting him, "The demon of racialism, the aberration of the Xhosa Fingo feud, the animosity that exists between the Zulus and the Tongas, between Basotho and every native, must be buried up and forgotten. It has shed among us sufficient blood. We are one people. These divisions, these jealousies, are the cause of all our who's and all our backwardness and ignorance." Priscilla Isake writes this in the early 1900s, I think in 1901, and publishes it later in Imvo Zabansundu. I think the illustrations I have just made will be sufficient to demonstrate the ingrained issues of race and class in South Africa, how they would not demonstrate the oppression. However, this would not demonstrate the oppression of women in society. On that score, and I'm conscious of time, let me just state this truism. In South Africa and Namibia, which Namibia was a mandate C of South Africa, if you all remember, and unlike in many countries for centuries, women experienced what we came to know as triple oppression. That oppression was based, one, on race, because some women were just black. It was based on class, because they were of peasant or working class background. And it was based on gender, that they were women, and this came with certain expectations from society. And I'm sure many who read the national question will understand that. By the law in South Africa, women were subordinate to men. African women could not own property such as houses. In cities, when the husband died, The municipality house, which was under the name of the husband, was supposed to be transferred to the firstborn son. Failure to do that, the family could lose the house. So the women remain perpetual children to men. Professional women were paid less than their male counterparts. The legal system itself promoted women abuse through hostile system, unequal salaries for the same job, discriminated against unmarried women, etc. We can count these ills that society, in terms of the laws that existed, that society imposed on women. Hence, was rape and other ills committed against women by men are the legacy of this system, which, like many other ills, we seem to find difficult to overcome. This is what we mean by institutionalized discrimination. It is the power that some arrogate to themselves over others and become institutionalized practice. These power relations operate parallel to institutional policies most of the time. It is in these areas that heritage institutions or memory projects need to strategically intervene to contribute to a different culture in society. What then is to be done? To borrow from the famous Lenin question. And I think I make proposals of some of the things that could be. One, I'm conscious that I think we must use the 4,617,485,000. If I look at the financial year 2019-20, this is what was the subsidy for the Department of Arts and Culture as a whole, to develop sustainable projects that are focused on development. Two, the heritage institutions, all of us who belong in museums, etc., our combined subsidy, our share allocation from the state was 572 million rand in the last financial year. I think we can also use that money in partnering with community projects. And we must also use objects that we so preciously conserve as instruments of development where we can. And if you look at all our objects in various institutions, we have not fully exploited them so that they can benefit our communities. And furthermore, I think we must use the education programs to skill communities while educating them about museum. We must also use our resources such as land to partner with communities in food production. We must also use these resources to encourage people to dialogue with each other and share skills. We must use these resources to attract young people to come up with creative projects and partner with heritage institutions. We can do these things by encouraging heritage institutions to adopt certain communities or projects and work closely with those communities. These are some of the interventions we can do as part of our contribution to the country's unemployment that was sitting at 27.32% before the COVID-19 lockdown. Just to conclude, you know, one of the ways in which the missionaries won people over frontier or the Eastern Cape, they built schools, they built universities, and they developed projects and taught people to live a different way of life. And with those things, people began to open up, began to engage with them. I think as museums or heritage institutions of memory workers, we have become and tend to exclude ourselves from the communities in which we are situated and communities in which we serve. I think we must go back and learn from what missionaries did and what missionaries were doing in terms of developing society and say, in terms of our own practice, in terms of our own things, that how can we achieve this? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Noel. I can see that, you know, just that you are actually really challenging. You've located our institutionalized racism and discrimination and how we've internalized it, but you're now challenging us to become museum activists and to become far more productive in generating and making or consciously going out and making links. But I'll come back to what you have